Lucy and I met each other when I arrived in England when I was living in Huntington, and Lucy was a primary school teacher in Doncaster. And I was a new Christian and passionate about Jesus, and soon changed all my plans. Instead of going back to America, I decided to stay here and get involved with planting a church. So for 20 some odd years, Lucy helped me remember family and the kids while I tried not to be obsessed and throw all of my energy into church. It was really good times. Lovely being in Cambridge and being involved with the kingdom. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little introduction to addiction. And specifically, I'm going to talk a bit about drug addiction and a bit about pornography addiction. And I'm going to tell two people's stories along the way. So, to start out, this comes from a 3-hour-long talk that I'm fortunate enough to be able to do in my job. But it's only 20 minutes, so I'm going to talk really quickly. The source of my information, besides the Bible, and besides my own life, is Gabor Mate's got an awesome book about addiction. Really compassionate, really insightful, really spiritual. And then there's a guy named Gary Wilson who has an awesomely huge amount of scientific information about what porn does to the human brain, called Your Brain on Porn. And all this stuff is up online, but he ended up making a book out of it as well. But if you don't have time for all this reading and you're interested, then I suggest you go check out a TED Talk on YouTube that's called Everything We Think We Know About Addiction Is Wrong by a guy named Johann Hari. Really good information, really awesome truths that he expresses. So I'm going to start by talking about this lady who I met named Claire, right? Claire knew that she needed to get out of her house. She knew she needed to leave home. She needed to run away because it was very unsafe at home. So she ran away and she ended up living on the streets in Nottingham. And she was afraid that she needed to be taken care of. She was afraid she needed someone to look after her. So she picked the toughest guy that she could find, joined up with him. But unfortunately, he wasn't just tough to other people, he was really tough with her. He wasn't just hard and violent with other people, he was violent with her. And so she got beaten up very badly. And in the process, he forced her to start using heroin. So it's a really heartbreaking story, really terrible. But Claire's story has some good stuff that happens too, that I'm actually going to hope to play you a clip of a chat that I had with her where she let me record her telling her story. And I've taken a few bits of it and I hope to play it for you guys because she's amazing. She's not only been through horrible situations, but she's really inspiring and really fantastic, a real testament to how much God loves us. So if I was to ask you, what do you think God, this is a congregation participation moment, so get ready to shout out something. If I was to ask you, how do you think God feels toward Claire? What heart does God have for this girl who had to run away from home and who got beaten up and got forced to use drugs? What do you think God's heart is about somebody? Pardon?
Loves her.
Loves her, absolutely. Anything else?
Compassion.
Compassion, yeah. Anything else?
Heartbroken.
Yeah, absolutely heartbroken. I might get frustrated with her if I knew her back then. I might run out of patience with her. I might even sometimes blame her for some of the stuff that isn't really even her fault. But I believe God is all of those things you guys have said. One of the quotes I have from her, she said, "I learned to cry quietly." Absolutely heartbreaking. But yeah, God's heart for her. I think there's a really good word in the Old Testament that touches on what God's heart for player would be. The word hesed is used 250 times in the Old Testament, and there's not really a good English word that expresses what it means, but some of the sentiment of it is mercy, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, loyalty, steadfast love, loyal love, loving kindness. These are the best attempt we can do with the English language to capture the beauty of this word, and which is, I think, a really good way of starting to say what God's heart for player would be. So here's a bit, out of all the 250 verses with this, here's one of them. Exodus, the Lord, mercy and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, hesed, and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love, hesed, for thousands. This is generous, exuberant, extravagant. This is how God feels about Claire, I believe. So let me just give you a couple of things to kind of frame what addiction is. And in this context, it doesn't matter if it's drug addiction, porn addiction, gambling addiction, alcohol addiction. To me, addiction is one thing, it just pops up and shows itself in different ways. So one of the elements of addiction involves obsession. If somebody isn't gambling, they're spending a lot of their moments in their head thinking about gambling. If they're a gambling addict. Mood manipulation is a bit of a surprise, but addiction in some ways is a way of coping with feelings. It's a way of managing our feelings. It isn't a very good way, but it is a way of trying to manage our feelings. Addiction always involves tolerance. So the amount of drugs that Claire would have been using at the beginning would have been low, but to continue to use it to manage her pain and to try to make the symptoms of withdrawal from those drugs go away would have had to escalate. You had to use more. And that's true in all addictions. We get tolerant, we build up a tolerance to it until we then have to use more. And then withdrawal. If we try to stop, our body, our minds, our emotions cry out. And really, it's very uncomfortable, it's very painful. And it tries to drive us back to that place of soothing, that place of escape. Conflict. Addiction always involves conflict. It always causes harm. It always involves harm. And then last of all, relapse. So if you know somebody who's struggling with addiction and they're relapsing or they have relapsed, I find it's really supporting and encouraging and loving to know that that's part of the deal. Relapse is part of what addiction is. People either relapse before they come to a point of recovery where they want to stop, or they may relapse even after they've decided they want to stop. So that's a little overview of what addiction is. Now, why does addiction happen? What are the causes of it? I really believe from the time that I spent studying it, learning about it, talking to people in my job in addiction, and through my own personal experience, I do believe that addiction is not just something that people are born with. Addiction has the element of genetics, maybe a presupposition through our genetics, but by no means could genetics or the nature side explain all of addiction. Addiction is very much involved with the nurture side, or what happens to us. And very interestingly, the greatest factor of all of the factors that contribute to someone becoming an addict, the one thing that's most prevalent is what happens to someone in the first 3 years of life. So when someone is a baby, when someone's a child, when someone's too young to be in this room right now, when people are in the Sunday special, or when people are in creche, that's when people are most likely for things to happen that will make them later susceptible to being addicts. So doesn't that bring compassion? Doesn't that bring love? Doesn't it make us care about if we see somebody who's homeless and who's stealing to support their habit and they're strung out on drugs? Doesn't that give you a different perspective to think about them? Because something happened to them probably when they were very young that laid this foundation. And even in the first year of life, every second, there are multiple millions of nerve connections or synapses that are being created in the brain. And that's really where addiction happens, is in the brain. So it really is the earlier in life that things happen to us, the more susceptible we are to falling into addiction. And besides nature, there's neighborhood. I heard the other day, there's nature, nurture, which is a really big thing, and then there's neighborhood. So if you live in a neighborhood where you can get heroin, you will be more likely to use and become addicted to heroin. If you're in a country where the pornography is readily available, if you're in a household where internet connection is open and unfiltered and readily available, you will be more likely to succumb to addiction of porn. So addiction really comes from things that have happened early in life that shouldn't, or things that didn't happen early in life that should. Trauma is a big thing. Just to keep on time, I'm going to skip to abuse is a big way of defining trauma. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, all these kinds of abuse Claire suffered from. So it's not at all surprising to me that she ended up using heroin. But pain is a big cause of addiction. If we don't know how to handle our emotions, how to process our emotions, then we will find something to cope. And if our neurochemistry is developed in a way that isn't ideal, because in the first years of life where we have certain kinds of neglect, certain kind of trauma, then pain that comes to us all can be too much for someone, and we find ourselves turning to something to make ourselves feel better. Eckhart tells us every addiction starts and ends with pain, no matter what the addiction is. Pain is what starts it, and pain is what it causes. So here's a story. In psychology, or in studying humans, there was a time when a study was done to look at addiction. And the study involved taking a rat, putting it in a cage, giving it some water, but also giving it some water that was laced with a very strong drug. And they gave it some food. And what they did is they watched to see what the rats would do with water laced with drugs, and food. And the rats would eat a bit of the food, and they would have a bit of the water, but then they would discover the water laced with drugs. And they would ignore the water, the regular water, they would ignore the food, and the rats would gorge themselves on the drugs, and they would starve. Rats would kill themselves because of the drugs. This experiment was repeated several times to show that it is reliable, and this was basically used behind the message that drugs are bad, drugs are addictive, don't have anything to do with drugs. But later, somebody looked at it and thought, well, these cages that these rats are in are quite small, and the environment that they're in is quite harsh. If it was a human, you might think it's like solitary confinement. So someone decided to redo this experiment. And they created this thing called Rat Park, which is like, imagine this whole room here, this whole space, with the walls painted with different colors. Like you can see those trees they painted on the walls. You can see they had cans, they had lots of things for the rats to interact with. They had other rats, they had exercise, they had stimulation. They tried to make it as close to normal life, to the normal natural habitat of a rat as they could. And then they put the same bottle of water in, the same bottle of water laced with a very strong drug, and some food. And in this case, none of the rats died from the drugs. Just like before, they would try the water, they would try the food, they would try the water laced with drugs. But because, for some reason, they didn't gorge themselves on the drugs and they didn't die. And the idea that's come from that, the theory, is that the drug wasn't the problem, the isolation was the problem. The lack of support, the lack of connections. Being stuck with nothing but themselves was traumatic, and so they found themselves escaping by using the drug, even to the point of death. Now, this experiment has been replicated. It has been carried out with humans, unfortunately, and by that I mean the Vietnam War. Because in the Vietnam War, a lot of service members had access to very strong drugs while they were over there. And the ones who were fortunate enough to live and to go back home, they reported and they measured. They said how many of the people who used strong drugs in Vietnam continued to use strong drugs when they got back home. Because Vietnam was a bit like the cage, traumatic, very scary, very upsetting. But when they went back home, they got jobs, they had families, they had communities. It's more like Rat Park, more like a more healthier environment. And if the drug was the cause of the addiction purely, then there would have been 40% of those people who may have been able to stop using drugs. Maybe 40%, because that's the best results that an addiction recovery service could hope for. But 95% of the people who used serious drugs in Vietnam stopped using drugs when they went back to their regular life with regular connections, regular support, jobs, families. So this Rat Park idea really challenges that drugs are not the core of the problem of addiction. Because if they were, well, how do you get addicted to gambling? So I find that is absolutely amazing and really interesting, really helpful. That the cause of addiction is not the drug itself. So the other things that cause people to become addicted, one way of looking at it is attachment issues. If we don't have the things that we need when we're very young, those first few years of life, of nurturing, of affection, of touch, and then when we grow up, we will have trouble connecting with people, we'll have trouble feeling confident and happy, and we'll be more susceptible to using addiction to make ourselves feel better. So neglect is, I'm not talking about a parent whose children needs to be taken away from them because they're neglecting them. I'm talking about just very surprising, subtle things that we need as humans to grow up healthy. So one of those is we need to have bonding, we need to have touch. We need to have soothing. Even before a human is born, even when we're in the womb, there's studies and evidence that shows that contact and affection and nurturing is really important to us. And this is what I find really fascinating. There's a thing you can look up called serve and return. When a baby is interacting with an adult, you see how the adult will make a face at the baby and the baby will make a face back, or the baby will laugh and the adult will laugh back. That interaction between a baby and an adult helps to build the neurochemistry, the neurology, the brain connections that make us strong and make us able to cope with pain and make us less susceptible to grow up to become addicts. Attunement is really important. There's something that happens between a baby and an adult where maybe the primary carer, maybe the mother or the father, can look into the baby's eyes and can communicate to it even without language. I see you, I get you, I know where you're at. I can comfort you. And this thing called attunement is really important for a human to grow up strong and confident and resilient and able to cope with difficult emotions. And these are some of the elements that contribute to people growing up to become addicts. It's not having attunement, not having the serve and return sort of experience. Who was leading the prayer meeting? Norman? Norman, you were leading the prayer meeting this morning. I heard Norman say that he saw someone who was struggling and they fell over. And being inspired by the Good Samaritan, he went over to try to help them. But he needed help picking them up. And this is something I think is really important about addiction, is boundaries. Like, what is it that we can do, and what is it that we need other people to help us do? Because addiction is very strong, it's very powerful, it's very chronic, it's very debilitating. So if one person tries to rescue and do everything that someone needs who's struggling with addiction, I don't think one person can do it. But there's a word in the Bible, fortune, and it's in Matthew 11:30, and it's also in Galatians 6:2-5. Have a look at this. I never noticed this before, but in Galatians 2:6-5, we're encouraged to carry each other's burdens, but we should carry our own load. This is like our own load, the things that we're responsible for, my own emotions and my own decisions and my own actions, whether I choose to indulge my addiction or whether I don't, whether I can choose to get help with my problems and get help with my addiction, or whether I don't. That's my own individual load that I need to carry. And it's like a rucksack, a knapsack. It's not too much, it's reasonable. You can be expected to carry your own stuff. But burden is like, if you guys open that cupboard there where all the gear is, can you imagine pulling all that gear out and saying, you got to get that stuff home? That's too much. The burden in this verse is just stuff that's too much for us to carry. We need each other. We need help. Norman needed someone to help him get this guy up off the ground, to help lift him up because he was too heavy for him to lift on his own. So this is something that's important in addiction, working with addicts and loving addicts, is to recognize what can I do, recognize what do they need to do, and recognize what do we need to work together on to need help with. And Matthew 11:30, Jesus says, his yoke, his burden is easy and it's light. So now I'll tell you a little bit about my addiction story. That's me when I was a kid. When I was about that age, my older brother showed me my dad's porn stash. And I grew up in a family where my mom was raised by an alcoholic and she didn't understand how to process emotions. She didn't understand how to handle emotions, and she wasn't able to teach me how to handle emotions. And my dad had anger issues. He lost his temper. And so I had all this conflicting, confusing stuff about what to do with emotions. And then I saw my dad's porn stash very young. So on some level, I probably, they say you do what we copy what our parents do, not what they say. And then somewhere along the line, that may have had something to do with it. But there was a lot of shame in my family around sex. I hope that you guys know as Christians that sex is a good thing, that God's made it. And it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. But for me growing up, I had a lot of confusing messages about it. So that contributed to me growing up to become addicted to pornography. And I came to plant a church in Cambridge, and I told my church leader about my challenges, and he was really supportive, and he stood behind me, and he gave me an opportunity to serve in the kingdom of God, even though I couldn't sort it out. I couldn't put it behind me completely. So I won't do this stuff because I feel like so for me to tell you guys that I struggle with porn addiction is a little bit scary. Like, you guys may judge me, you guys may not understand, you might think worse of me. But me and Lucy both believe really passionately that the Bible verse that says if we walk in the light as God and He is in the light, then the blood of Jesus will cleanse us of sin with fellowship. There's something about fellowship. So I believe passionately about being honest. And every time I tell somebody about my addiction, I do it hopefully sensitively and hopefully appropriately, I feel a little bit of shame fades. And it's because I'm bringing it out into the light and allowing God to do what God does with bringing things into the light. So, sorry, Tony, I'm really bad with time. Am I out of time?
I'm happy for us to overrun because this is really good stuff. So,
okay. The lady that I told you about in the beginning of the story, her name is Claire, and this is her. So she was homeless, and she was beaten, and she was abused by her own father. She lived on the streets. But let me just play you a little bit of her story in her own voice.
And then the worst part was my son. My son went to school and he said, I don't want to live with my mum anymore. And children's services had already been involved. It was the hardest day of my life.
The one thing you were trying to avoid, your number one priority was to take care of him.
Yeah, and I completely messed it up. So I don't really talk about that day. But then after that, it was 2 weeks later, I remember getting a good idea, and I remember thinking to myself, I've got no reason to get up. And I thought, that was when it clicked, I'm going to die. I never thought I'd die before that. I wanted to die a lot, but never thought that I would die. But then the problem was because he'd moved to his father's mother's, and his father was having a lot of control in it, and he would say, you're only allowed to see him if I'm there. So I was going through court. And that was just a horrible experience because they made out I'd abandoned them. And I hadn't bothered to contact him. I was saying this isn't fair because it is not true. But they gave me 1 hour a month in the contact centre with 3 months back in Nottingham. So to see my son,
a dangerous place.
Yeah.
And that guy was still around?
They both were. All of them were. So, but I remember the solicitor saying, if you want to be there for your son, if you're going to have any hope of increasing contact, you can't miss this contact. So I was like, it doesn't matter what happens, I've got to make this contact.
Gosh.
But I did it, And so as I was learning to touch type, you know the Goosebumps storybooks for children?
Yeah.
I used to take them, because that used to be my thing with my son. That used to be our own thing. But when he went to bed, I'd read a page, he'd read a page. I'd read a page, he'd read a page. So I used to touch type all the Goosebumps books out for him and post them to him. And then I got a volunteering placement at Sue Ryder, Thorpe Hall Hospice, in the fundraising team. And it was awesome because I was helping organise all these fundraising events to raise money for the hospice. And I remember feeling ever so proud. It was one of the greatest achievements in my life when they trusted me to count the charity boxes. But the problem was I walked away and my hands were orange from all the 2p's and 1p's in these boxes. But somebody trusted me.
Yeah.
Then I got involved in service user involvement. And I became the strategic lead and the secretary for the group about having your voice heard. But I'm sat in a room with the head of police, the head of the job centre, the head of safeguarding, these people from the council, housing. These are all the people I spent all my life avoiding, and I'm in a confined room with them. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, open your mouth, open your mouth. And the more anxious I got, the more nervous I got, the more I wanted to put my head down, the more I was like, hold your head up, hold your head up.
Wow.
And they took it as aggression. I built my contact, I kept going to court, and the judge was kick-ass. Because his dad and all of his family were trying to make out I was just abandoned my son. And he saw through it. And he kept increasing my contact every time I went back. It was really hard at one point, because after I stopped using drugs, my immune system plummeted. And I got glandular fever, and I was just wiped out, but I couldn't miss my contact. So I had to sleep for a week to recover from going, and then sleep for a week to prepare.
Gosh.
Just to go for my contact on a Saturday. They were completely screaming. So I may never have taken him to school, I may never have seen him in his school uniform, but we ended up becoming so close. And he would come down every other weekend, and I would share school holidays, alternate Christmas and New Year, and it was me and him time. And he became like my soul friend, you know. I love him so much. But when he got his university interview, he didn't see the email, and he phoned me really panicked one night, and he said, you know, I said I hadn't heard anything from the university. He said, I didn't see the email. He goes, my interview's tomorrow. So I was like, right, stop everything. I'm going to come and pick you up, and we're going to go and do this, and we're going to go and do that. I took him for his interview, and then I took him to university, and then in July, look, I'll show you a picture, and I asked, is it okay to whoop when your son graduates? And everybody was like a bit backwards and forwards. But I stood up on the top of this podium and I was like, woo, woo, woo.
Which university did he graduate?
Salford, and he got a first with honours.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's my boy. So look, there he is.
Oh, excellent.
But then it became about, I need a reason to leave that front door today. And my mental health was really poor because I was diagnosed with PTSD. So I used to be just alert all the time, scared all the time because of the pornography when I was a kid. I used to walk down the street and think every man has seen my photo. What if you've seen my photo? What if you've seen my photo? And it was like, so I realised I had to have a purpose to get out of bed. And that's what it was, even if it was sitting on the computer and touch typing out a Goosebumps book. So I starfish in my bed in the morning and I look at my roof and I think, but I got a roof. And then I get out of bed and I think to myself, you know, if you're ever worried about food, open your kitchen cupboard, you've got a tin of beans and some brown sauce. It's like, oh. And if you've got little sausages in that tin of beans, it's like meal for a king. Oh my God, you know. Because when you haven't eaten for days and you don't know where your next meal's coming from, you appreciate that so much more. I'm somebody that struggled with life, and drugs helped me through that period. And what I'd really say is, do you know what, perhaps without drugs I might never have made it through. I had a great ability to switch my brain off and go somewhere in my head. And I think all these things helped me survive. Because I always call her like little Claire. Like, because little Claire was never cuddled or anything else like that. If I ignore her, she comes and batters me round the head. So I have to acknowledge, I like jumping in rain puddles, and I like walking in the rain and holding my tongue out, and I blow bubbles sometimes through a straw if I'm sitting in there. But I feel like I've been given a gift to do something to help others.
I hope you were able to understand some of what she was saying, because it's so powerful when people tell their own testimony. She went to all those depths. Her children were taken away from her. She was able to work really hard to get access to her son, and she helped him to get into uni. She was so proud, showing me photos of him graduating, and she gave him a lift to his new job. He's the light of her life, and she's so grateful to have him in her life. But she isn't living on the street anymore. She now works for the Drug and Alcohol Services, and she was the manager of the Drug and Alcohol Services location in our county, one of them in our county when I met her. And so Claire, to me, it's easier to understand being compassionate and loving and patient and caring toward Claire when I think about understanding why addiction happens. But my challenge to you guys is her father who abused her. How do you think God feels about her father who did these terrible things to her, who drove her to run away? Unforgivable, if there's such a word as unforgivable, it's terrible. But what do you think God feels toward Claire's own father? That's what I want to leave you challenged with. And you may say, I can't imagine God loving him. I can't myself imagine forgiving him. That's okay. But I just wanted to leave that with you to think about. Thank you.